Welcome to Sib Spot. Today we have day 3 in a row of Malicious Compliance. Our first story is by Happiness in Household. If you ain't part of the problem, you ain't part of the solution. Recently commented on a post and remembered this one. Posting it here for your amusement. Over the years, I've developed a seemingly counterintuitive mantra that if you ain't part of the problem, then you ain't part of the solution. This is the story of how this glorious epiphany first dawned on me. I've never been one to take much BS from anyone, and especially not one to hand BS down to others. Obviously, this led to me joining the military at a young age, where such attitudes were praised. Somehow, I survived my days in the military with this go-getter attitude to the point of being put as the lead of a division. My department was in charge of all the major equipment for my unit. Each division owned their specific equipment, and as a whole, the department maintained quite a bit of administration for this equipment. Run hours, maintenance logs, hourly readings for every gauge and meter, etc. were kept on paper. I mean, a lot of paper. Being as it were, the people under my charge had developed an efficient system where about a ream of paper's worth of blank forms were pre-made and marked with yellow highlighter, and ready to copy each day to make the forms for the next day. Fun fact, markings made in yellow highlighter will not transfer to the copies when fed through a copier. On the day in question, my division was responsible for making forms for the next day's use. However, the auto document feeder for the copier had broken. Now in the military, there's no such thing as established working hours. No picking it back up the next day. You work until the job is done, whether it's noon or midnight, and you start fresh the next day. So there's obviously a lot of incentive to get the job done and done right, lest you get called back in to fix it so that you can go home. Being there are periods of time where you are deployed and home is a barracks halfway around the world. When you weren't deployed, time home was something to be valued at the end of a workday. I took a look and this copier was on its last leg. The plastic was completely busted, and there were obviously multiple previous repairs made to lengthen its life. However, the copier's wounds were now clearly terminal, and no additional life could be afforded with any amount of ingenuity. As it were, I declared a do not resuscitate and sent someone to requisition a replacement. Upon return, I was informed that the supply officer had denied my request on the grounds that manual copies could still be made using the document glass, one document and one side at a time. Cue Malicious Compliance. I always wanted to do something like this guy does. It's epic. Now, before I finish, I want you to remember that 1. I don't take any BS from anybody. 2. My department was using this copier daily for 500 plus documents. 3. This would directly impact the amount of time people had with their families. And 4. I wasn't about to let stuff travel downhill to people under me. I lugged this copier into the supply office's quarters along with a sledgehammer. Wouldn't you know it, but upon seeing it up close and its innards all over the floor, the supply officer not only agreed that a replacement was in order, but approved the transfer of a seldomly used copier from another department. Sure, I got a talking to later, but in the words of Lieutenant Aldo Rain, I've been chewed out before. I think most people at some point in their life want to take a sledgehammer to a copier just because. It's one of those cathartic things where you just want to smash something, and copiers always give people problems. There's always a list of issues with copiers, and I would love to smash one. One of the top replies in the comments shares another story by Zilksdaguero. I did something similar with protective suits we had. I was initially told we were going to get replacement ones for the ones we had been using for the previous 30 years that only about 4/5 of my people could fit into. When they told me I could only replace the ones that were damaged beyond repair, I decided it was time to find a suit to fit my biggest guy who stood nearly 7 feet tall and weighed close to 275 pounds of solid muscle. First, I decided to see if the suit issued to my smallest member, who only stood 4'6", would fit him. Wouldn't you know, he busted every seam on that suit. We kept trying other suits with the same result. He managed to be able to squeeze into one of them, but darn, this boy's still got to be able to move, right? I had him try to squat down and pick something off the ground, and it split the butt wide open. Son of a gun. Guess all the suits were damaged beyond repair. I think some place would still try to sew them up. Hopefully this is a kind of material that can't easily be sewn. Some things, once they rip, they're dead. Our last story is by Bovine Arithmetic. I'm not a volunteer? Okay. In the 1990s, I was a college student studying botany. A local botanical garden sponsored a plant sale every year, which brought in dozens of vendors of rare and native plants and probably upwards of 1,000 plant fanatics. People would drop thousands of dollars on plants at this sale. The botanical garden had a volunteer policy that was basically work for 2 hours helping at the sale and you get in a half hour before the general public. I seldom bought anything, but I knew and chatted with several of the vendors, and it was nice to peruse without the insane crush of people. The mostly elderly volunteers did various tasks like man the cash registers and information booth, and the younger ones like me would set up tables or help people carry out their purchases. One year, I discovered that I was really fast at assembling boxes. The botanical garden had boxes printed just for the sale. They were basically cardboard flats for carrying plants. At some point, I started coming 2 hours early just to put together boxes. I would do 20, while others were struggling to make one. By the end of 2 hours, I would have a huge stack of boxes that would last through most of the sale. The last year I volunteered, there was a new person in charge of the volunteers. When I showed up and started putting boxes together, she came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" "I'm putting together boxes." "You're not on the list." "There's a list? I'm just a volunteer." "Volunteers are required to work 8 hours in the garden every year, and I've never seen you before." This was news to me, having been doing this same thing for several years with no issues. Seemed suspicious considering how most of the volunteers were in their 70s or 80s. I had encountered this type of person before, so I knew better than to try to debate policy. "Well, okay," I said, dropping the box I was putting together and walking to the back of the line of people waiting to get in. I had only been there long enough to put about a dozen boxes together. The stacks of unassembled boxes sat there and no one else came in to put them together. After the tiny stack of boxes was gone, people had to put together their own boxes, and they were pissed. The line went really slow, and every person had to stop and make their own box. A minor inconvenience multiplied by 1,000 people becomes a real problem. I'm just sorry that the public had to bear the brunt of it. For some reason, most of the malicious compliance stories I encounter are volunteers that are being told you can't do this or don't go there or don't do that. Like all these really good souls who are just there to help people and they're trying to do a good service for these communities and for these organizations, and they just get scolded or reprimanded by the people running it who obviously have no idea what they're actually doing or how things are run. Regardless, today's episode has come to a close. If you enjoy this content, please consider clicking like or subscribe or leave a comment below. It helps my channel reach more people in the YouTube algorithm. Until we meet again, have a graceful day.